Welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're talking with Christine Miller about enterprise risk management. Chris, great first and second segment. This one I'd like for us to talk about examples of enterprise risk. What are some of the categories or examples you can provide us?
Well, there's many to think about, and in that segment that I've mentioned, that I'm working on a more detailed training package in enterprise risk management going online soon. I've come up with 14, but a lot of them overlap. And what I've seen in the better risk registers is where you actually have the enterprise risk. So that could be something like reputational risk, and then you have the operational elements addressing those. So, as I said, I've come up with 14, and there's a long list, and they're not independent. They're overlapping. So, things like strategic risk, operational risk, I mentioned many times, financial compliance, reputation. And you can see how things like reputation, compliance, legal risks might relate. Cybersecurity is front of mind, but also physical security. Don't underestimate that. Human capital, environmental risks, and of course, one of my colleagues puts it very well. The climate has changed, and we're now looking at new records being written in the flooding in northern New South Wales. Political risks. We've seen so many changes with what do they call it, Trump Mark II, and of course, you in Canada would be only too aware of some of those risks. What
Yes,
trying to make it a 51st state or something quite
fully aware of that
extraordinary.
one. Yeah.
Yes, even in faraway Australia, we've heard about that and gone. "Huh?" And there's been the occasional mumbling over the years about whether New Zealand should have been something or other state in Australia, and they joke with whose constitution, but that's a different matter. And infrastructure is something that I spend a lot of time on, and I'll come back to. But finishing off with what I call the potential risks, which are some of the things that look a bit sci-fi, maybe we need to wrap our minds around. And perhaps we need to start with reputational risk because that heavily impacts on your entity. As Warren Buffett, that great business investor in the US, makes a very good point. It takes you 20 years to build your business reputation, 5 minutes to lose it. And in a social media environment, it could actually be quicker. I was watching what happened with the Asiana crash in San Francisco a few years back. Their share price dropped from the third largest airline by capitalization in Korea to the fifth before they made their first public statement, their first media announcement in public. Now, I don't know exactly how many dollars that is, but every time Qantas buys a plane, it impacts on our expenditure in Australia. So I can imagine it impacts in Korea too. So we're talking about a lot of dollars. So reputational risk has become front of mind for many senior people, excuse me. And so, as I said earlier, I work for a lot of people with chief in their name. And so they think a lot about reputational risk. And of course, in the social media environment, often things can be misconstrued, taken out of context, given entirely the wrong spin. So a lot of my practice involves crisis management plans. Excuse me. Crisis management plans. How are you going to get prepared for a reputational crisis? How are you going to exercise your crisis management team, your communications team? And I advise clients to do that at least on a 6 monthly basis. I don't know if it's the case in Canada, but in Australia, we tend to turn over our communications teams quite frequently. So you need them to be ready for your business in terms of traditional and social media, as well as internal and external. Often when there's a challenge, you kind of forget about your own staff.
Mhm.
If you're running a larger business, people are always interested in what's happening in the next office or the next region or something. They might have worked there. And they might have had friends who still work there. So they'd like to know what's going on. So don't forget about internal communications as well as external communications. And these are all things that you can prepare. Smart businesses are finding a lot of friends during business as usual times, so that when something happens, it's often your friends that will defend you rather than you having to argue the case about misunderstandings. I've seen that, for example, with Queensland Police, where I used to work, when there were flood problems and people were criticising their failure to respond quickly enough. It was their friends on social media that came to their defence. So
Hmm.
building up as a business as usual, that stock in the reputation space.
How about human capital risk?
Yes, that's another one, and that's becoming more and more an issue. I understand in the cyber security space, we'll be thousands of staff short of what we need. Now, of course, AI is helping us in some of that space to detect things and deal with them faster, but we still need people. And no matter how good their AI is, I've just spent 3 days attending a virtual hybrid event in New Zealand where we've been talking about AI and emergency management. Terrific. We get AI models, particularly of fire and flood and so on, to prepare our resources and target them better. But you still need a human to actually check it. As wonderful as some of these models are, the AI models are not always as au fait with the nuances of some of these things, particularly in the emergency management space, but also in other parts of business. So we are moving some of the human capital away from routine business and handing that over to AI, but we still need the humans. And of course, we need the humans for innovation and for developments and so on. So it's actually quite a blessing to be moving people away from routine tasks into a space where they can be more productive, more innovative, and moving your business forward. You know, we talk about opportunities. Here's some real opportunities. A lot of people see AI as a risk, as a threat, as a hazard. No, 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 no. You're misunderstanding. It's a potential for opportunities to expand your business in different ways, but also shortages. So, for instance, in the care industry in Australia and Japan and elsewhere, there's quite a lot of discussion about robots. I've seen some fascinating examples of robots being used in aged care in Japan and in
Hmm.
healthcare
Yeah, I've
to
seen
do
that.
simple tasks like bandaging with dementia patients, picking up their pen so they can keep doing their crossword, listening to their dad joke for the 600th time, and just being helpful. Just spare your human resources for more technical and difficult functions. So, and there's just a worldwide shortage of skills in some particular areas. We'll all be suffering from that in time.
So the next one I'd like you to talk about is examples of infrastructure. What were you getting at there?
Well, goodness me, there's so many examples there. I was recently in Spain and Italy, and soon after we left Spain, no, we didn't do this. They had significant power losses in Portugal, Spain, Andorra, and southern France. And initially, people thought it was a cyber problem. No, no, no. Aging infrastructure and inadequate maintenance. And it isn't just in the power sector. In many of our what we call lifelines in New Zealand, critical infrastructure in Australia, I don't know what you call it in Canada, but things like power, communications, finance, water, the list is long. And all of these things, if they fail, our businesses are in all kinds of trouble. And food security is increasingly becoming an issue, particularly, say, if you're in Gaza. Oh my goodness, even though the Israelis are now letting some trucks in, they're the logistics of getting the food from the trucks to the people in desperate need. So all of this space, and some years ago I was in Genoa walking under the port facilities there and looking up at these concrete pillars above me of roads, which a few years later collapsed.
Hmm.
The bridge of one of those bridges that I was probably walking under collapsed onto a train, onto the uh, train lines. So, and it turned out when they did the after action review that it was both badly designed and badly maintained. And a lot of our critical infrastructure is way beyond its alleged usable life. And the only thing that's saving us was it was heavily over engineered in the first place. And all of these things will have flow on effects to your business. Now, it may be beyond your business to, to mitigate, but you need to prepare for it. What happens if you lose power?
And what happens if you notice that a bridge, as an example, of one in Genoa, because I remember the one that you're talking about, the one that went over the valley, so to speak, collapsed in the middle. Um, if you only have suppliers that come from, let's say, the other side of that valley, how else do you get your product across to the other side? Or how do you get your suppliers to come to you? Do you have somebody on your side? Like, you're not just relying on this one route. Everything we get comes from somewhere else over here. Well, we got to spread that out a little bit, right? So there's an opportunity there, if, as you mentioned earlier on, to look at different ways of mitigating that risk of that one single route.
Exactly. And of course, Genoa was the third largest container port in Europe. And this was a key highway route, which then meant the trucks had to go through suburban areas
Hmm.
that were not designed for that kind of heavy traffic. So, what is plan B? Now, if your goods and services come through Genoa, are you going to put it through Civitavecchia or Napoli? What are you going to do? Then you're going to add extended road transport. So there's all these questions that you need to pay some attention to, particularly if you've got those what we call single points of failure. What are you going to do? What is plan B?
Yeah, we only have 3 minutes left. Do you have any
Mm.
final thoughts you'd like to share on enterprise risk management? Anything you'd like to share?
Well, it's all about preparedness, I believe, and mitigation. Think about these things. What can you do to prepare? What could you do to mitigate? And before we started, we talked about a really big ticket item
Oh,
of
yeah.
asteroids.
Yes.
Now, you might say, "Oh goodness, this is not going to impact on my business." Oh, really? But if you work for NASA, the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, or the Indian Space Agency, now these are very serious people who work on evidence base. They don't waste their money sending asteroid missions to try and bump asteroids away from the Earth just for the hell of it. They do it because their enterprise risk assessments indicate they could have a huge impact on Earth were any of these asteroids even to have a close approach. They don't actually need to hit the Earth, they just need to get close enough to be a problem.
Yeah.
So here's a wonderful example of enterprise risk management at a sort of global level that that we see in other organisations, and that they're willing to invest money to try and mitigate, to prepare, so that should any of these asteroid or orbits come dangerously close, we are prepared. We know what we're going to do. Now, your business mightn't be a space agency; it might be something more modest. But what can you do to prepare? What can you do to mitigate?
Yeah, and the asteroid example was actually in the papers late March, early April, somewhere around there,
Mm.
where it was in the headlines all the time about this potential asteroid. And usually that's a joke, like, oh yeah, yeah, we're going to prepare for an asteroid strike. But to your point, sometimes that's a red flag. It's sure it might be going past us. Okay, so yeah, it's a joke, it's going to hit us. But sometimes there might be something coming right at us, and we do have to address it. And which is what,
Well, just quickly, we had solar storms in May of last year that resulted in 500 satellites being steered away. Does your business rely on GPS? Do you have a trucking business, for instance, where your couriers need GPS? If your satellite's moving around, your GPS could be damaged.
Yep.
And if your satellite gets fried because of a solar storm, then you're really in trouble. So, some of these big ticket items, they can impact on real small businesses too.
Yeah. We already have issues with GPS sometimes taking us to dead end roads or wanting us to go across a river where there's no bridge. So we don't need to compound that.
No, don't worry. Siri tried to send my husband and I down a one-way street the wrong way in Sydney some years back. That was pretty unhelpful.
Well, we've come to the end of the show, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us to talk about enterprise risk management.
My pleasure, Alex. Always happy to catch up with you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and I'm sure there'll probably be another time too.
Thanks, and all the best to your viewers and listeners. I hope it's given you some food for thought.
Thank you once again, and everyone watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody.